Hi everyone, my name is John Cummings. I'm with Better Homes and Gardens Castledon Realty. Welcome to my channel. The reason I created this channel was to just provide some general information to individuals that would have an interest in learning more about the ins and outs of real estate and how it affects our everyday lives. Whether you're a home buyer, or home seller, an investor, or someone that's just interested in learning more about it. It is a huge industry, and it does affect our lives, every day. Feel free to subscribe or like my videos, share them if you feel the content is valuable enough. If you ever have suggestions or comments or would like to see some different types of videos in the future, feel free to leave comments. Today, the topic I wanted to focus on was the Fed, or the Federal Reserve. Now, which we typically refer to them as the Fed. Being in the real estate industry, I hear a lot about the Fed. Maybe you don't hear about them as often. I'm pretty well in tune as to what is going on with the Fed, but I wanted to share who the Fed is, who they are, what they do, and how it affects us on an everyday basis, because they really can affect our everyday lives. So I'm going to start off with, who or what is the Fed? And the Fed, or the Federal Reserve, it's the central bank of the United States. So at a very basic level, that is what they are. They're our central bank. So they consist of 7 board members, which we typically just hear about the chairman. Jerome Powell is the current chairman of the board, but there are 7 members. Um, and it also consists of 12 reserve banks that are scattered throughout the country. In Pennsylvania, ours is located in Philadelphia, so I work specifically in Pennsylvania in the Lehigh Valley. And if you see me around the Lehigh Valley, I mainly focus, in the Saucon Township area, Hellertown, but our reserve bank is in Philadelphia. So the Fed is also, they are the bank for these banks. So you have these reserve banks that get currency from the Federal Reserve. So the Fed, or the Federal Reserve, is a bank for these reserve banks, which then provide more currency for all the other banks in the United States. So they are the ones that provide the currency. They print the money, as we refer to it. So what do they do? Getting into what does the Fed do? They conduct monetary policy, and on their website, it specifically states that they conduct monetary policy to provide maximum employment, stable prices, and moderate long-term interest rates. So I know most of us know the Fed as, they raise interest rates or they lower interest rates. But a lot of us don't focus on is they are also um, responsible for employment. It's one of their goals is to maintain employment throughout the country. So yes, they are affecting our interest rates, and we've noticed this past year that they've been raising interest rates, pretty significantly. I think it's the largest increase in the shortest amount of time ever in history. Um, but that is one of the levers that they use to help control what we all are referring to as inflation right now, which could be a whole separate video in and of itself. But that is one of their responsibilities, to moderate long-term interest rates and stable prices. So right now, do not have stable prices. We do not have stable prices, which I think is affecting us all on an everyday basis. Which is why they are raising these interest rates. So one of the ways that they try to combat this inflation and to try to bring back down to the stable price environment, is they increase the rates, and then typically that causes a slowdown in the market, because it does affect our ability to buy things, such as a home. Interest rates goes up, it generally pushes a lot of buyers on the lower end of the scale out, because of the higher monthly payment that they would have to pay for a home. Along with that, we'll get into a little bit more about that, but They also promote the stability of the financial system, and they provide oversight and regulation. It is a government agency, and they are providing oversight and regulation through all the banks in the United States, which is one of the reasons they have those 12 reserve banks scattered throughout the United States, is because we're not just one market in the United States. It's many different markets. It's just like the housing market. It's not just one market. The Lehigh Valley is different from Houston, which is different from Southern California. They're all different. So the banks are the same way. So to get feedback from all these different banks in different locations allows the Federal Reserve to get information about the entire country, and to see how things are changing throughout the country and get an overall picture. So how does the Fed affect us with the policies that they put into place? And I think this is really important because we all talk about, or hear a lot of talk about, how, especially with the millennials, how voting sometimes doesn't seem like it does a whole lot, because we don't really get affected by these policies right away. It's not just a quick thing that happens. But with the Fed, that is one thing that is affecting us almost instantly. And it really does. The day that something happens with the Fed, we usually see a rapid change that directly affects us. So, how do they affect us? Well, the first thing that they do is they impact our cost of money. So, where banks and lenders set the rates for interest rates, such as your 30-year fixed loan, for example, they have to get they get a rate from the Federal Reserve. Like I said earlier, the Fed is the bank for these banks. So once the Fed increases their interest rate, it's basically the same thing as a price increase. So if you think about a product, if you're rolling out a product and at $1, it costs $1, and then you go in and say, and then you go to a distributor and say, I'm raising your price by $1. You're doubling the price. Well, that distributor is basically going to then go pass along that price to the consumer, which you will see in the end product, which in this case would be a 30-year fixed loan. So basically, when the Federal Reserve raises interest rates, they're basically doing a price increase to these banks to get money. It's a price increase on the money that they lend out. So, this doesn't just affect housing. It affects your credit cards. It affects your car loans. Anything that requires a loan, this will affect, because it is the rate to borrow money. And in order to to buy a car or to buy a home, a lot of people will get a mortgage, or they'll get some sort of type of loan. And this is where those rates come from. Now, the Fed doesn't go out and tell a bank, you have to raise your interest rate by 50 basis points or a full point, but they do set the rate at which the bank has to, the bank gets their money, the reserve banks and all the other banks in the United States. So in order for that bank to make money, which a bank makes money by providing loans, so if their cost to provide a loan increases, they also pass that along with a higher interest rate, which is why we see at the end result of a 30-year fixed loan, the interest rate goes up, or any other type of loan for that matter, credit card loan, car loan, anything of that nature. The second thing that the Fed impacts very almost instantly is savings rates. So yes, it's true that interest rates are going up. And it's true that does impact, our ability to, purchase homes at a certain level, and it increases the cost of money. But it does also increase savings rates. So, let's just say, for an example, you have $100,000 in the bank, and you had, just to make it simple, 1% savings rate. So, for every year, if you have $100,000 in the bank, you're getting $1,000, just for keeping your money in the bank. Now, as interest rates go up, so do the savings rates. So let's just say instead of that 1%, let's just say you get 2%. So now, instead of getting $1,000 a year for keeping your money at that bank, you are now getting $2,000. Now, the irony with this is, you may say, oh, that's great. We're getting more money for keeping the money in the bank. However, we also have to look back at why these rates are increasing. And like I mentioned earlier, is these stable prices. The inflation is impacting our everyday purchasing power. So, we'll go back to that example of your 2%. You gained $1,000 a year in just for keeping your money at the bank because their savings rate went up. Well, if you gained 1% in your money for keeping at the bank, but inflation's at, let's just say, I think the recent CPI, the Consumer Price Index, was at 7.7. So let's just say 8, just to make it round. So you gained 1% or $1,000 for your $100,000 that you keep in that bank. But based on inflation, your purchasing power or your ability to buy things has reduced by $8,000 of that $100,000. So now that $100,000 you had a year ago is now only worth $92,000. But you gained $1,000, so $93,000. So your net effect is minus $7,000 based on the impact of inflation. So yes, you are gaining in your savings rate. However, you're still losing purchasing power, which obviously isn't really great. Which brings me to my next point about what the Fed affects. If you're not going to keep your money in the bank, what are you going to do? What are you going to do with it? So a lot of individuals are putting into retirement accounts, savings accounts, Roth IRAs, 401ks, whatever it may be. The Fed typically has a major impact on our retirement accounts. So let's just say you're with your company and you have a 401k with them or a Roth IRA or whatever it may be, and you're using a money management account and they're placing your money within the stock market, which is very common, it's very typical. But as rates increase, you could probably see in the market, stock market goes way down. Now, why is that? Well, it's because the cost to borrow money has gone up. So, these stocks aren't able to continue to grow as rapidly as they were before because there's not enough supply of money to continue growing. In addition, this also provides concerns about slowing down the economy in general. So as rates go up, there are less things that we could buy easily, as opposed to lower rates, which slows down the economy, which slows down purchasing. It slows down the velocity of money, which in turn affects the stock market. And the reason it impacts it instantly instead of having a lag is that the smart money or the stock market knows this. It knows the economy is slowing down. So the stock market's all based on perception. So if the market perceives that there's going to be a slowdown, then stocks drop or there's sell-offs. So your retirement account that's placing money in these stocks, it's most likely going to go down. Obviously depends on what you're in and the market and everything else, but typically that is the first effect of for your retirement accounts. The fourth thing that the Fed affects is your purchasing power, and I mentioned this briefly when we were earlier, but lower rates they encourage purchase, they encourage buying, and it's when there's low rates it stimulates the economy because money is cheap basically. It's cheaper to get a loan. It's easier to get I shouldn't say it's easier to get a loan, but more individuals have access to get loans, and that stimulates the market. So this may be a good thing. It is a good thing in certain circumstances, but it also is kind of what has led us to the situation we're in right now with high inflation. So if you stimulate a market and you create high demand for goods and services, but you don't increase the supply of those goods and services, well, that just creates high demand and low supply. What does that do to prices? It increases them, and as we've seen now, it dramatically increases them, which is one of the reasons why we have this high inflation. And if prices rise, that obviously affects our purchasing power. As I described before, if you had $100,000 in the bank, and prices go up by 6-7%, well, you just lost 6 or 7%, or $6,000 or $7,000 of your $100,000 that year because of that. However, when we do have slowdowns in the market, the Fed does lower rates to stimulate the market. It just depends. It's a continuous balancing act between stimulating the market and slowing it down, and that's one of the things that they're doing. Now, the fifth thing that the Fed does affect, and again, this is very immediate impact, is the job market. So low rates, as we just talked about, they stimulate the market. So if you have low rates and you have high demand for goods and services, you're going to need more workers to provide those goods and services. So as we've seen this past year or two, restaurants, construction, they can't keep up because they can't find enough workers. The job market is so hot, right? It has been so hot because the rates have been so low, and everybody's trying to keep up with the supply of goods and services. So lower rates typically means a hotter job market, or there's less unemployment, low unemployment, I should say. High rates does exactly the opposite. So as the Fed increases rates, I know currently we're sitting around, I think it's 3.7% unemployment. I would definitely expect that to be rising in 2023. I think we've seen some of that start to happen already with the layoffs at Facebook, Amazon, and you're going to see this with a lot of those markets that grew rapidly due to the high demand for the goods and services. They had to keep up, so they hired a lot of people. But now, with the slowdown, those markets, so the restaurant industries, the hotels, retail, they'll probably get hit the hardest because they took on a lot of the jobs at high wages, and now they're going to have to pull back some. So those are five things that the Fed really impacts us, that we see on a day-to-day basis. It is probably one of the most influential government bodies that there is. I think everyone really should pay attention to what they're doing. And if you ever have questions or want to discuss further, feel free to reach out to me, either on my channel, on my website, my Facebook page. Again, feel free to like the videos, share them, subscribe them, and leave comments. So thanks, guys.